Today I'm making apple and bramble jam. I've got a big bowl of blackberries that have been picked from the hedge this morning, a large bowl of apples, I won't be using all the apples, and 1 lemon. The lemon is needed to raise the pectin and acid levels in the jam. So what I'm going to do is slice the lemon and simmer it gently in water for at least an hour. So the lemon is sliced. I'm leaving all the pips in and all the skin is still on. I'm putting in about a pint of water and I'm going to bring it up to the boil and then simmer it on a slow heat with the lid on. And if it loses too much water, I will need to top it up later. But it needs at least an hour until the lemon is completely soft. Now that the lemon is thoroughly cooked, the peel is very soft, I'm going to drain off the water into the jam pan, and this is the liquid that I will be cooking the apples in. Now the reason for putting in the lemon water is that even though the apples are high in pectin, there's virtually none in the blackberries. So the lemon water is a way of making sure that the acid and pectin level is sufficient to make the jam set. Now if I find I haven't got enough water for cooking the apples, I can always cook the lemon again and get some more water off it. To prepare the apples for the jam pan, wash them and dry them and then cut them into slices. Discard the stalk and the flower end. Take out the core and put that in the pan with the lemon peel and cut the slices into chunks into the jam pan. And the reason the skin stays on is that the pectin is in the skin. And what I've done is I've already got about 7 apples altogether, including this one in the pan. And once I've finished slicing this one, cutting this one up, I'm going to bring the jam pan to the boil and simmer the apples for probably 3/4 of an hour until they've gone to pulp. First of all, I'm going to bring them up to the boil and then I'm going to simmer them with the lid on. And while I'm bringing the apples to the boil, I'm also going to get some more cooking liquid from the lemon and the apple cores. So I'm going to cook that again, bring the small pan up to the boil and simmer that for a short while too. The apples have just come up to the boil. I've turned the heat down. You can see that they are already reducing to pulp. So I'm going to put the lid down and cook them very gently with the lid on until they are thoroughly cooked. And we need to give them a long slow cook to get all the pectin out. Meanwhile, the lemon skins and the apple cores are still simmering gently. The apples have now cooked to a thick pulp. So what I'm going to do now is add the blackberries. They've been rinsed and checked for any insects or bits of grass. So they're all going in and they're just sitting on the top, and because it's too thick to cook the raspberries, in the apple pulp, I'm now going to add the water from the lemons and the apple cores from the other pan. So that goes in. And you'll notice that I'm being careful not to force any of this pulp through, because if you start forcing through the lemon peel, the whole jam will taste too strongly of lemon. So I'm just going to get all the moisture I can out of there. Put the sieve aside. And give the mixture a good mix and bring it up to the boil. I've got the pan on a high heat to bring the fruit mixture to the boil, and you can see that the colour from the blackberries is now going out into the mixture, and I'm stirring it constantly just in case it sticks, because there is a tendency for a thick fruit pulp to stick. So while it's on a high heat, I'm making sure I'm stirring it all the time. The mixture has just come to the boil. It's very thick and frothy. It smells absolutely lovely, and it's got a lovely deep colour. So now I've turned the heat right down to the lowest heat, and I'm going to simmer it very gently with the lid on, and I'm going to have to check it every now and again to make sure it's not sticking. But I'm going to give it at least half an hour so that all the blackberries are thoroughly cooked. The apples and blackberries have now simmered for about an hour. I've let them cool down, and you can see it's a nice thick mixture. You can still see the blackberries. It's best to check the blackberries against the side of the pan, because some of them can stay a bit hard. So if you give them a bit of a squash with the spoon, then they will go into the mixture better. See, that one is a little bit hard. It was not quite as ripe as some of the others. There it is, it's squashed. So you can just check that they're all nice and soft. And the next stage now is to measure how many pints of fruit pulp we have. So I've got this bowl ready here. I know it contains 4 pints. So I'm going to spoon the mixture into there. And if there's more left over after that, I will see how much is left over beyond 4 pints in the measuring jug. And you can see what a nice thick mixture it is. I've measured it out. It comes to 5 3/4 of a pint. So I'll put all the mixture back in the jam pan, and then I'll measure the sugar. All the mixture is now back in the jam pan, so what I'm going to do now is weigh 12 ounces of sugar for each pint of the mixture. So here's my first 12 ounces. So I'm going to put in 5 lots of 12 ounces and 1 lot of 9 ounces for the last 3/4 of a pint. The sugar is all now measured out into the bowl. So now I'm going to add the sugar to the bowl, about 4 or 5 large spoonsful at a time, and stir it in slowly to dissolve it into the mixture. And the heat is now on under the pan on a very low heat. I'm not going to bring it up to the boil until all the sugar has been thoroughly dissolved. So I'm going to stir in this first bit of sugar, this first lot of sugar, and I'm not going to add the next lot of sugar until this first batch is thoroughly dissolved. All the sugar has now been added. The mixture is now quite high in the pan. It's been on a low heat and I've turned it off for the moment because I'm now going to taste it to see if we've got the right level of sugar. So just a little bit of juice on the spoon. That tastes absolutely lovely. It doesn't need any more sugar. The reason I'm tasting it is that when you use cooking apples, because they are not a sweet apple, it's difficult sometimes to judge how sweet they actually are. So for this jam, I've added 12 ounces of sugar per pint of fruit mixture, but if it hadn't been sweet enough, I would gradually have sweetened it by adding 1 more ounce for each pint of the fruit mixture, and I'd have gone no sweeter than 14 ounces per pint. If you go beyond 14 ounces, it can get very sweet and sickly, and you have to remember that the sweetness will intensify because this mixture is going to reduce down as we are going to take it up to setting point. So because I'm satisfied with the flavour and the sugar level, I'm now going to put it on a high heat and bring it to the boil and see if we can reach the setting point fairly quickly. The jam has just reached the boil. You can see it's a little bit frothy. I'm going to give it about 5 minutes on the boil, and then after that I'll test for a set. In the end I gave it about 7 minutes at boiling point. I've turned the heat down and let it settle for a minute or two, and now I'm going to test for a set. So I've got a plate that has been in the fridge, it's nice and cool, and I'm going to put a good blob of the mixture on and leave that in the fridge for a while and see if it has reached setting point. To me at the moment it looks a bit runny, so I think we might have to do the whole thing over again, but we'll see. I've tested the jam for the set. It was still runny. I would have shown you, but I ate it all. So what I'm going to do now is just look at the jam that's in the pan, and you can see it's forming a skin on top. So we're nearly there, but not quite. So I'm going to put the heat on and bring it up to the boil again and give it another 7 minutes before testing it again. It's had the second boil up, approximately 7 minutes, so let's give it another test. And it is looking a bit thicker this time, and there's a lot less of the froth forming on the top when it's bubbling, and it actually looks more viscous when I put the blob onto the plate. So that's going into the fridge. The heat is off under the pan, and I'm going to wait and see. I've tested for the set again, and it wrinkled very well when I pushed it with my finger, and the pan, which has been left to cool, has formed a thick skin on top. So I'm going to put a very low heat under the pan. I'm going to mix that skin back in so that it's nice and smooth, and I'm going to get the jars out of the oven and start potting it up. So the jam has had about a minute on a very low heat, just to make sure that the skin all goes back into the mixture. So I'm now going to put the jam into the jars. The jars have been in the oven on a very low heat and are all hot. So I will use my metal jug. It's a gravy boat, and fill the first jar. And I keep a fork in the jar when I pour it in. It helps prevent splashing, and it takes a little bit of the heat out, just in case the jam is a bit too hot for the jar. So there's the first jar filled, up to about 1/4 inch of the top, and I'll carry on and see how many jars I can get out of this batch of jam. So now we have 1 empty jam pan and 12 full jars. I'm very pleased with this jam. I know it tastes lovely, and it's going to store well because I've tightened all the lids while the jam has been hot, so that as it cools the lids will have a vacuum forming inside. So there it is, apple and blackberry jam.